to Piecing It Together with Annica and Ben. I'm Ben.
And I'm Annica.
And we...
Go ahead. I was saying, normally we are here talking to people who are cultivating pockets of peace in a world that all too often assumes violence and is inevitable. We are technically doing that today, but the people we are talking to is each other.
Right.
As a check-in.
So, since this was my madness, should I explain what we're doing today?
Go for it.
Okay. So rather than have a guest, we thought that since we're new at this, we'd check in a little bit. And I thought about... I don't know about the rest of the world, but I feel like everyone's a little overwhelmed in my sphere. And so I said to Annica, let's get together and just chat for a little bit about two things. First, the thing that's kind of disrupting your peace, we'll call it, right? The thing that sort of keeps you up, that you're kind of worried about. And then the second is the thing that is giving you hope, right? That is sort of keeping you going. So would you like to go first? Or would you like me to go first?
Ooh, yeah, I will go first. And my guess, so it's funny, Ben, you mentioned this to me, and when we were texting and planning, I joked that like I would talk about despair and then hope, maybe in that order, but no promises. But then I was actually thinking, I feel like hope and despair are a yin yang similar to like faith and doubt, where you don't need hope if you're not wrestling with despair on some level, in the same way you don't need faith if you're not up against uncertainty in some way. So I suspect it will be a kind of a swirl of hope and despair in conversation, because yeah, actually you get hope when you are dealing with despair.
Do you think maybe like, okay, so as you were saying that, now I'm going to interrupt your flow because that's my thing. But I was thinking like biblical hope isn't really the same thing, right? As like we think of hope as like, can we get through this moment, right? So there's that kind of hope, right? The short-term hope. And I think biblical hope, right? If you're like, I mean, we're Presbyterians and a Presbyterian podcast. I guess we're Christian types, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a kind of a longer view, right, when it comes to sort of the hopefulness of faith, right? Because we're always looking at kingdom, right? We're looking at that all the time. And so I think people are mistaking hope for coping.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that might be a sign of just how heavy things are right now. Of like, definitely. I don't have the stores for hope. I am just trying to get through the week.
Yeah, I'm just getting through the day.
You're absolutely right. That's a different thing.
Anyway.
Well, wait. Say more about how do you define biblical hope?
Well, I mean, I think of hopefulness not so much as like the idea that like everything, I mean, I think it's just this larger idea that, right, like everything ultimately, right, leads to this place. And this place is ultimately, right, the re-perfected world, right? The place of peace and love and hope and all that stuff, where all that stuff is that's just the status quo, right? That's just the real heaven, right? So the idea of heaven, right? Our hope is in heaven. And so, our hope has to be grounded. I think, this is my opinion, our hope has to be grounded less in kind of measurable human things, and it has to be grounded more in just this kind of idea that like God is paying attention, right? That God is still there, right? And that God is still guiding us toward, right, this ultimate place. The frustrating thing about God is always that God is never going to do things in a time frame we like.
I hate that.
Yeah,
you're right. I don't like it, but it's true. But okay, thank you. When you mentioned you're like, I'm talking about biblical hope and general, I was curious how you saw the distinction. So thank you. No, the things keeping me up at night right now, the things that are really making it both necessary and difficult to access hope. I think that the biggest one, and what makes it so stressful, is how nebulous it is. It feels like there's just this multi-front assault on rights in the United States right now. Right. That isn't, it's not a surprise. Like we did a whole special, very special episode on this podcast on the day of the 2025 inauguration, which was full of activists being like, yeah, we know things are about to get rowdy.
Right.
And they were all correct. But oh my god, it has been 4 months. Wait, January, February, March, April. It has been almost 3 months since that episode. And in that time, like, I'm watching the legal system just get all these cracks in it. The big ones on my mind. I keep thinking about the the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO and
Mm,
the citizen, the suspect, not to be confused with the actual person who did it, Luigi Mangione, who has just been paraded and is being treated as if he is the person who committed a crime when we are not even done with the legal process, and that scares me. As far as like, like we are this is not to assigned meaning, but we're it's almost Easter, and I keep thinking about the Jesus story, and I keep thinking about Jesus being paraded before he was
right.
charged with
Yeah.
anything. It's an intimidation tactic. And it freaks me out how public that has been. And I feel so bad and so scared for this kid, honestly. Um, this is not something he asked for. This is not something appropriate, but it is something he is having to endure. Um, that's one iteration of citizen. Another iteration of resident is Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia University graduate who is basically snatched and is currently in the courts determining whether he can be deported for participating in a protest about the US's actions in Palestine, which again is legal, um, but it is not being treated like it is. And then very close to home, I live in Kentucky, and a lot of the folks within the Fairness Campaign have been watching a bill that is really essentially re-legalizing conversion therapy,
Yeah.
anti-gay therapy in the state, and
Yeah.
it's just like these are three different. They're interacting with kind of three different levels of legality and life in the U.S. And it's just a shit show all the way through.
Yeah.
It's tough because all of them feel like you need a really intense and strategic and organized and consistent counter response to respond to any of them.
Right.
And there are so many people in the States and so many hours, and we all also like need to also like go to work and show up well enough to not be fired and pay our bills. And that when I the crush of it all for me is just feeling like there's more going on than I can respond to at any given time, and it's all really it all has awful ramifications. um Gosh, for what life looks like looking forward, both for me and for people I care about.
Yeah.
That's it. You asked and answered. Let's talk about despair. Because it's rough out here, Ben.
Well, no, I think it's similar because, like, as I was thinking of this, I was thinking, I think the one thing that has truly kind of chilled, like, really sent a chill down my spine, is these innocent people in El Salvador, right? Who are in an El
Mm-hmm,
Salvadoran
mm-hmm,
prison. Mr. Garcia, is he from Maryland, I believe?
mm-hmm,
There's the gay hairdresser, right?
mm-hmm.
That became kind of famous. And look, if there's two,
Then there's more.
yeah, right.
Yeah,
There's 20, there's 30, and
yeah.
so
These are the two we are aware of.
right.
These are the two that
Because
got a
just as
platform.
you were talking, I was because you say this idea that like there's so much, and then I think like we've only seen really what we can see, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just assume that everything below it is darker than I can imagine, right? And so, but what's frightening about it, right, is that it was done um, political parties decided that it was toxic to talk about, and so it didn't become a political issue like internally in Washington, right? Because who wants to defend gang members who aren't gang members,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And then we have all of this chaos, right? This circus that erupts with the vice president saying silly things, and all these people saying. And I think the bottom line, though, is that we have sent innocent people to a prison camp in El Salvador. And
Hmm.
I want people to sit with that for a minute, right? And I know right now everybody thinks, well, they're just the brown people, so whatever, right? It's the right people. Um, but what happens when they run out of them, right? It takes a lot to be a desirable as opposed to an undesirable, right? Like so,
Hmm.
so if you think you're a desirable right now, you might be right now, right? Um, but it goes on and on, because what happens is if we get used to this, right, then it gets much easier
Hmm.
to start disappearing American citizens, and claiming they're guilty of nefarious, horrible things, when they may or may not be. We have no freaking idea, right? Because
Hmm.
apparently evidence is not a thing anymore, and due process is not a thing anymore, and so this undermining of the legal structure, um, is truly truly dangerous. And we see it, right? Free speech, with students who write op-eds for their college newspaper, right? Better think twice about that, right? If you're going to,
Yeah,
criticize the dear leader or whatever. So, I that really terrifies me.
yeah. And
Um, yeah,
it's the ramifications for, nice white Christian citizens like you and me, that is scary in itself. And then the reality for folks who aren't in that little quote unquote desirable
right.
space, like it's already happening, it's already
Yeah.
horrific. um
I mean, like
and
I'm still like I'm only desirable as a white male. Like once they run out of brown gay people to get rid of, I'm next, right?
mhm,
So like, so
yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to make allusions to Germany in the 1930s and whatever, but it always begins with the ones it's easy to get rid of.
Mhm. it
Like,
it
yeah,
it does, but I would argue, like, I mean, I you won't make illusions, but I will. It's We're already escalating, right? And it starts with folks who aren't white, it starts with folks who aren't cis, it starts with folks who aren't straight, and then it creeps. But like, it's also already creeping. Like, it's
oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
the and I don't, my concern as we're talking, I don't want to say that, like, it's only awful because it could escalate. Like, that is a real fear. It's also just in itself horrific and evil, frankly.
yeah. Like I mean, people
To
keep
have
saying
folks
like,
living these lives.
oh, we're sliding into fascism. We're there.
Yeah, no.
Like,
Well, and I think it's one of those where, like, but the slide is the fascism. Also, I get that metaphor, but I also feel like, no. But if you're sliding, then you are there. If you're
exactly right.
sliding, then you actually, if somebody is being fascisted, that's not a verb. But no, for real. Like, if people are being deported with no cause and no due process, guess what? That's what fascists do. We are here. Yeah, talking to go back to this original question of what is keeping you up. That is keeping me up, and I think part of what's keeping me up too is feeling like it's it's difficult to come back from that. It's difficult to rally enough resistance. It's difficult and scary, frankly, to push back. And that's what's needed, right? Is enough people with platforms and with power to both vocally and logistically push back. And I'm seeing, I'm seeing people in power scared to do that. And I'm even like, this is really getting personal. I can feel it in myself, right? I've
Mm-hmm.
been So my day job is I work as a chaplain at Louisville Seminary, and we've been chatting as students frequently about both just the overwhelm and fear and demoralization of trying to preach hope in this context. I also have been chatting with our international students, who have basically explained
I can't even imagine. Yeah.
they're already there, and they mentioned things like, I'm nervous about getting saying something in a pulpit that somebody doesn't like, and the wrong person hears it and they record it, and then someone makes a call, like they're already self-censoring, not out of cowardice but out of safety. um and and I think I can even feel it in myself, like, yeah, who's going to hear you, and who is the person who hears you in bad faith and decides to get nasty about it. That is a
Right.
that is
Yeah.
a real actionable fear for marginalized communities already. And like you said, that circle of who's in a marginalized community, the circle of who is or isn't protected, like, a lot of us are losing protections real fast.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of like, um, you know, everybody read the book, right, on tyranny, right? The idea that the first thing was don't obey in advance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, the cowardice that we have seen across the spectrum, right, of politics, news, you name it, right, culture. Um, it's really disheartening, right, to see these people who we thought were kind of, titans, suddenly
Mm-hmm.
just say, "Oh well, I guess I'm scared now, so I'll just do whatever." I mean, legal firms giving away legal services, and and forget about tech people. I don't know what the hell is going on with those people, but
We
um,
don't have time. We don't have time. And I would like to do a podcast that's not exclusively swear words. So. But anyway,
right,
we're
because it's the same with like like these Wall Street people, right? Like I don't get it. I don't understand what you're doing. Like I really don't. And so it's like the injustice of it all, right, is heartbreaking. The chaos of it all is maddening,
Mhm.
and the absolute disregard for other human beings, right, is enraging. And so, what do you do with all that energy, right? I mean, like it's literally just exhausting to exist right now.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean,
And
if you have privilege, you should abuse it in service of others.
yeah, well, and okay, so I'm gonna see if I can draw the thread between that like that hope, despair, yin yang, as you were talking about, kind of folks with power obeying in advance. Because you're right, that's something that I think newly we're seeing clearly and distinctly in a way that's unique to right now. But when I think about, like, okay, why do people self-censor? Why do people comply prior? And I put my, like, trauma informed hat on of, like, no, for real, like, what's underlying that behavior? It's a fear of losing security.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's a fear of losing security, and that's rooted in the reality that, like, the we don't live in a culture that tolerates dissent very well. That is becoming very visible right now, but it's not actually new.
No.
And
Yeah.
like this, yeah, so like this compliance in advance, like, this is not new behavior. These are workers who have come up in a capitalist environment where, like, even if you're very well off, you're one firing and a couple of months away
Yeah.
from
Hmm.
losing access to housing, to losing access to nutrition, to, like, some very real deep body level needs. Um and yeah, and I know none of that is by accident, right? All of
Right.
that is has been planned a certain way by people with power who it benefits to keep citizens and workers on the ropes, as it were, because
Sure.
if you are scared to lose your job, if you are scared to lose your platform, or if you're scared that, yeah, like you know on some level you have free speech, but actually your employer needs to also like what you're saying, or
Right.
you're going to lose your security. um that's a society wide trauma, right? And weirdly, that's also part of where the hope actually sparks back off for me, is the recognition that like what's happening right now is it's an intensification of something that we already have been doing and surviving, and that sucks. Like, this is not me silver lining what is happening right now, but it is me recognizing, okay, hold on, if we've been here before, then that also means two things. A, folks on the margins have survived this before, and B, there are models for survival then that we can tap into. And I think that's where actually the hope in the despair kind of starts to come forward for me, is like this feels impossible, maybe in some ways because it's hitting me at a very root level, in a different way. But there are elders, there are mentors who have already been managing and organizing and resisting in this kind of environment. So you're not we've got models, we just need to kind of find them. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I'm willing to agree with that to a degree. And I
Okay.
think because I do think that there are some things that are different. Like I don't think we have quite ever experienced this level of lawlessness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the unwillingness to recognize the checks and balances that are supposed to like, you know, be the guardrails. And so I'm not sure, right, that we've quite been this willing to be criming all over the place, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and because I mean, I was thinking today, like when I was little, I was told crime doesn't pay. I don't think that's true anymore. Like I think that's a lie now. Like clearly you can just crime, and then whatever. But and so I do think that and the other thing that I am seriously concerned about, and we have seen this before, I think, um, is the normalization of political violence.
Mm-hmm.
Because very few, right? Very few say like political leaders in our country have been willing to mobilize political violence, right? In the way that it could actually do real harm. And so, somebody just tried to burn down the governor's house in Pennsylvania. I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
that's I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's probably political violence, right? And so that part of it I'm finding a little disconcerting, and I think what happens is, right, it feeds into this idea of we are afraid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you are afraid, um, you will do a lot of things you think make you safe that don't make you safe.
Yes.
And yeah,
Yes.
right. So you'll tolerate a tyrant, if the tyrant can make you feel safe, right? But I think the problem is nobody feels safe. And
Yeah.
so so the hope for me, right, where the hope comes is that I think we're about to enter a revelatory moment, where people are starting to say, wait a minute, because I was at the protests that happened, right,
Mm-hmm.
and I met people there who are not liberal maniacs. They're not progressive commentators. They're not they were like Republican voters, right, who
Mm-hmm.
thought that they were getting
Yeah.
a better economy, right, and didn't say give I'm going to give up my Social Security, right, and so
Mm-hmm.
I mean I do think we're starting to realize that when you dismiss immorality and when you dismiss depravity long enough, it's going to get you.
Yeah.
Um, and And I don't like the whole leopards eating faces moment type stuff. I mean, I don't want to see people suffer. It breaks my heart that people are having
Mm-hmm.
these realizations, right? Because I really don't know who signed up for this. And so I do think the number of people who may be okay with what's currently going on is a lot smaller than we think it is. And so, I my hope is that I do believe in my sad Pollyannish little heart, um, in the blackness of my frozen heart, right?
Your
Um,
sad, beat up Pollyanna,
right.
your little side of the
Like
road Pollyanna heart.
I
It's
do,
just
and look, I'm going to say this because I think this is an important thing to say as a Presbyterian. I believe democracy works. I still believe, right, that with all of its faults, it is one of the better governing structures. And so I think people think that too. And I think the problem with Americans is we don't know what authoritarian is because we've never had it. And so, Europe is looking at us and thinking, oh, we've done this, what, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, right? And so they know what it looks like. We think we know what it looks like, right? But we've never actually lived through it. And
hmm
so, some things are happening that don't look like it, but they are it, right? Like, I mean, right? Like disappearing people off the street is not normal. And
right.
so, I think we're just starting to get to the point where we start to realize that this word all these panicky people were throwing around is a real thing,
hmm
right? That this is real. Authoritarian, it's real.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. As kind of seeing more and more folks rally and get radicalized, that's also a source of hope for me. Yeah, I think I've got friends, and I would even count myself, frankly, as someone who is like, a nice middle class white lady, like, and who does not enjoy being in the streets, frankly,
Mm.
but has been in the last few years. Not very very often, because my limbic system is that's not the space that I am doing my best work. But sometimes you just
I'm
need
the
a
same
voice in the
way. I
crowd,
think I think the last time I
um,
protested was, I think, the gay march on Washington, the last time, the LGBTQ march on Washington. But
gotcha,
I don't
gotcha.
even know if I think protests do very much, except that I think I was in Seneca Falls.
hmm
Um, Seneca Falls has a storied, civil rights history, and there were like over 1,000 people in this tiny little town.
yeah.
And I think what I saw was not so much that the protestiness of it was good; it was the solidarity that was good.
I mean, that's what I think
Yeah,
protests are for. Honestly, I don't think they are in themselves big political chess moves, but what I do think they are is I think they're morale boosting. I think they're reminders for people who feel terribly lonely that actually you have lots of friends in this fight. Um
yeah. I
I
want
would
people to
love to
understand that, like,
see.
you don't have to throw stones at Teslas to go to a protest, right? I mean, you can literally
Right,
just
yeah.
go and just be a body, right? Just show people, right,
Yeah.
that this
And
matters.
and I think, and that I really do. I think that the number of folks who are starting to realize that and show up in that way is growing, and it is. It's you cultivate. That's where you cultivate the kind of courage to
Right.
start bringing conversations and bringing pushback. As you're talking to family and coworkers, and doing the kind of relational building that goes into changing a culture. No, that I share that as a source of hope. You also mentioned like global uh, histories and like places in Europe and places outside the US that have in fact already been here. And I'll share that's part of what I was thinking when I talk about there's people who have been here before.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I my story that I've been thinking about as I was prepping for this podcast, I got to when I was in undergrad, at the ripe old age of 20, I got to spend a semester abroad in Lithuania, up by
Mm.
Russia. And I had roommates who were from Ukraine. And it was 2012. So it was the first presidential election, US election, that I was eligible to vote in. And I had to vote absentee because I was out of the country for the actual date. So my roommates were chatting as I was like getting my paperwork and to vote. And they mentioned like, oh, that's like, oh yeah, that's really interesting. And like that you care enough about it to go through all the work for it. We honestly never have because it's not worth it. And I was like, what do you mean? And they kind of explained like they come from a country that has pretty corrupt polls and politicians and whose one is kind of predetermined with money and violence, and they're like, you could cast a vote but it's not going to do anything. um and I remember at 20 being really like that shocked me. That was the first time I'd ever heard that that happened in the
Right,
world.
sure.
um and at the time, in a way that I don't know, I now look back on with kindness, but also feeling very naive. Like, wow, I'm so glad I live in a country where that would never happen. Fast forward to 2025, I'm like, I'm thinking about those Ukrainian elections a lot. I'm thinking about like, oh, okay, so that's the panic, right? Is that we're gonna wind up there? But then I'm also thinking like these were rich, deep, full humans with rich, deep, full lives, with communities, with ways of caring for each other, um, and building families and building communities and celebrating life in addition to
Right,
living in a system where they did not have, good political or legal representation. And that was a facet of their life, but it was not the only facet of their life. Um, and so I've been thinking about them a lot recently and trying to figure out as maybe I don't know, a way of giving myself permission also to like continue to find ways to stay human and stay
yeah.
connected to art
I
and
think,
relationship as well as activism.
like, now that you say it, I mean, I think the Ukrainian people are one of the things that give me hope, right? The
Yeah.
idea that they understand the stakes, right?
Yeah.
They understand what happens if they lose. And so they are going to do whatever the hell it takes, right, to make sure that doesn't happen because they know what it's like to lose your democracy.
Hmm.
Just as you said, right? They've been through all of this stuff. And so, for them, I think I kind of wonder sometimes, like these people looking at us kind of willingly giving it away. Like what must they be thinking of us? I mean, like, we are
Sure.
literally taking it for granted. That's we've always taken it for granted. Like, I'm the same way. I never thought people being sent to a prison camp in El Salvador, and I mean, that doesn't happen in America, right? That's not going to happen here,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I
Well,
once we started caging children, I kind of, my veneer was tarnished, but it's but I don't think it's naive. I think it's the line we were fed.
yeah, no, you're very right. Like there's been a myth of who America is. And I was thinking that I like we don't I don't want to fully relitigate, but as you were talking about, we've never been this close to this brink in the US before. I don't know. I get it, like, because you're right, it is the scale feels distinct, but this is also, it's not the first time that like
Mhm.
non-citizens had to really
Sure.
like
Right.
what they are told, what rights they are told they have versus how that actually manifests
Right.
if you talk too much smack about the US government. Like that's not new. When we talk about, police brutality in black and brown communities and what rights you're told you have as a citizen compared to what actually manifests when those body cams are off, like we've been dealing with that kind of violence for much longer than right now. um
Yeah, I mean, I guess
yeah.
I guess my thought is this is I don't even know if this is going to sound right, but I mean, there's a part of me that thinks like this is the first time that all those things have been the umbrella principle, right? The principle under which the government operates now,
Oh, okay,
right?
sure.
Is are these
Okay.
things, right? So it's not. I mean, like people like in the past, we at least try to pretend we were ashamed of things, right? Or we at least hid them, right? I
Uh-huh.
mean, we are literally releasing videos of us deporting people because we think it's like good television. I mean,
I mean, it's an intimidation tactic.
Well, yeah, and we know what it
It's
is. It's
yeah,
state propaganda, right?
yeah.
And so, so I guess that's where I am. Like, I've never quite seen it as like, wait a minute, the foundation of our nation is now grievance, vengeance, cruelty, and racism, right?
Hmm.
That is that is the operating principle. Not that that hasn't always been in some way or another an operating
Yeah,
principle. I think this is the first time they've all come together in such a large way,
such a
right?
large way, and I think
Yeah,
you're onto something in terms of the visibility and the like celebration
yeah,
of it
we're
as about
excited about it.
yeah, yeah, that is intense and visible in public in a
I mean,
way
if
that
you or I
is
sent an
ugh.
innocent man to a prison camp in El, look, I'm shaking myself, a prison camp in El Salvador, and we knew he was innocent, I wouldn't sleep again until I knew he
Mm,
was safely back on this. Our response right now is, whoops, what are we
right.
going to do about it?
Yeah,
And
and then
which
it's
is an
scary.
orchestrated response. I get it. But I have a question for you, and I think this might be a funish thing to end on, but it's not really fun.
That's
So,
a high bar on this topic, but
yeah, right.
continue. Yeah.
It'll be the least fun thing you do today, right? So because I've been thinking a lot about, I was preaching obviously about Palm Sunday today because it's Palm
Hmm.
Sunday, and I was thinking about this idea of like, I kind of think the voices we need to hear right now are the ones we don't hear as often, right? The ones that are the more humble voices, the quieter voices, the gentler voices, right?
Uh-huh.
Who don't always, speak up. They just want to sort of pay their taxes and live their lives and do their thing.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I was thinking about, I'm a peacemaker. I believe peace is absolutely essential. I believe justice and peace are, basically brother and sister, right? I believe that, I don't believe in violence. I don't believe that brutality is ever going to do anything. I don't, I think fighting fire with fire makes bigger fires. Um, but uh,
Mm-hmm.
the struggle has been, right. I travel in a lot of political circles because I'm a political junkie, and so I know lots of people, right, in sort of that are involved or very interested in politics, and they are all in this like, let's just punch him in the face, knock him down, tear him to pieces, like
Uh-huh.
go to war, rah rah. I mean, people playing with really dangerous language, right, and I mean, and using all these war metaphors, right, for what we're doing, and
Mm-hmm.
and I get it, and I mean, but I'm of the opinion, and I'll ask you, like, I'm of the opinion that might be a short term solution to something,
Mm-hmm.
but it is not a long term foundation for stability, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's basically just regime change over and over and over again,
And
right?
that's I think that's the
Yeah,
big fear. Yeah.
yeah. And so, I mean, I think, but I don't know how. Like, I haven't hit the message yet about how to sort of, I'll call it weaponizing peace, right? Um,
Yeah, well,
yeah,
and there's I think I'm getting what you're getting at of like and that we've chatted with other like real true pacifists on this podcast before too about like that's what makes peacemaking such a discipline
yeah,
is you've got to get you've got to pull out all the stops when it comes to relational work and finding and noticing and leveraging the way power flows to peacefully de-escalate a situation where you have people willing to utilize violence. Um,
right.
and you have not actually asked a question yet, but I'm assuming your question might be like, where are you at with all
Well,
this?
I mean, it's just
But
I'm trying to like, yeah, I look here, and I think this might be the problem because what I'm going to ask you is, how do we counteract this idea, right? That we have to just sort of beat each other up and like we have to sort of enter into this war and bring our knives to the
mm-hmm,
street fight and all that stuff and whatever the craziness is. And I think part of it is, one of the, I'm going to get a little Christian for a minute, but one of the wonders, right, of Jesus
mm-hmm,
is that Jesus basically conquers Jerusalem without uttering a word, and when he does utter words, they're words of grace and forgiveness, and kindness, right? And so, his triumph was that that literally no war had to happen, right, for Jesus to do
Hmm.
this work. And so Jesus's entry was nonviolent, right? And so as a Christian, right, um, I'm fundamentally disgusted by violence.
Hmm.
And I don't think that, I don't want Jesus to have an M16 and enter Jerusalem throwing
Right.
grenades, right? I
Yeah.
don't want that. And so, I don't know how to say I don't want that without letting people know that, meekness is not weakness and humility is not weakness. And these are not weak
Yeah.
traits, right?
Yeah.
It's about being intentional. It's not about being weak, right?
It's about being intentional, and I guess here's the criticism I think I would give both the US and even like there's a little bit like this is some in-house criticism. So if to my fellow peacemakers who are listening, please know like I don't know. I don't want this to perpetuate the like in fighting amongst leftists because that's we got too much of that already.
Yeah,
Okay,
way too much. Yeah.
way too much. But one thing that I do think about a lot is like I think I don't know if this is a US specific thing or a Western thing or just a human thing. I really don't know how deeply it roots. But I think we tend to conflate conflict and violence.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
means that as Americans, like really, really, we are terrible at critique and
Right.
terrible at dealing with conflict
Yeah.
before it escalates to violence. I think frankly it's absurd that Trump even got a party nomination. I don't understand why more people did not just say actually no, you are not on the level. Like this is not okay. Um and I also like there's another trick here because this really plays into the question of power and abuse of power. But I remember in 2016 when Trump won the electoral college vote, there was a real question of like, hey, if you're a representative and you really think this guy is a true threat to democracy, do you do you block it? Do you change your vote as a representative? I don't know that would have been helpful. It's all what if games, right? But I do think frequently about just like if we had, I don't know, if we had said, you know what, like these systems exist in good faith to promote representation, but we are being played
Yeah.
right now, and like pump the brakes. Like I don't know, I would we
Yeah. I
be
mean,
in a
I think,
different spot, or would we at least be having a different caliber of a democratic crisis? I don't
right. Yeah. I mean, I think,
know.
as you were talking, I was thinking, like, I remember when that conversation was going on about the Electoral College. And I remember my favorite quote was, I don't even remember who said it, but they basically said, you don't save democracy by undermining democracy. Right.
Yeah,
And
which,
so,
which I but you also don't save it by fucking rolling with
right.
somebody
Right.
who acts like
Yes.
this.
No, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Right. And I mean,
and that's where
this
I
is the
feel stuck.
weird,
Yeah.
I mean, this is where your head
Uh-huh.
just, wants to explode. And so, I mean, I think, I don't know. I mean, if confusion and chaos was the point, then it succeeded. I mean, and because we are chaotic and confused and we're not sure what to do. Um, but I keep telling people, like, we have to, like, those of us, right, who are in positions to have any voice in the world, whether you're standing in a pulpit or you're on one of these thingies, a podcast or whatever, right? Um, I don't think we get to be silent about
Mm,
what's
mm.
happening, right? I know that's unfortunate and I think it's risky. And I know, I get the impulse to not want to do it. I mean, I just want to preach about loving your neighbor and, like, you know, I don't know,
Yeah,
doves,
yeah,
right?
but loving
So,
but loving your neighbor but loving your
right.
neighbor in
But
this
loving your
context
neighbor,
means
it turns out, is a lot
it
of shit.
and it means in this context talking about loving your neighbor requires engaging conflict. And
Exactly. And
that I do
right.
think we have a responsibility to do the miserable work of doing well, because it is
Right.
miserable work.
We are, I mean, we are a
But
conflict avoidant culture.
yep,
And so,
yep.
and by the way, I mean, I'm not sure I agree with all the folks who want to blame millennials for that problem. You know,
Are we being blamed for that too? I
you
wasn't
are,
even
yeah,
aware.
you're all, I'm Generation X, so basically we just hate
Okay.
everyone. But, yeah, you guys are, too much anxiety.
I mean,
Too much,
yeah.
yeah, whatever. But anyway, and so, but I think, I think what's happened though, right? I mean, if you look at our current, you know, leadership, we have elected that fragility to run the country.
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. No, and that
Right.
part makes me crazy. It makes me crazy, as that's my reaction
Right. And if
probably
you think
betrays.
about yourself, right, when you're in those fragile places, it
Mm-hmm.
also means we've elected unpredictability
Mm-hmm.
because, look, it's all fight or flight. I mean, that's basically where these people live, right? And
Yeah.
so we just don't know what they're going to do. And so, I mean, it makes it just crazy. I don't know,
And it
exhausting,
paves
maddening.
it paves the way for which, if you're in a if you want to abuse a conflict averse a system, you become a bully.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Right.
that's, yeah.
We're,
So
we're, we're in the church. We know how this works.
God bless. God bless God's people. They're the same everywhere. But yeah, no, I think that, yeah. And so I think, yeah, I guess maybe in part to answer that kind of catch-22 is and on a micro level, on an individual and a communal level, like, figure out how to start engaging conflict well, and in a way that does not necessarily like conflate, like, oh, this person is opposed to me on something, that must mean they're my enemy. Because I do think we're kind of, that's
Yeah.
another
Oh,
trauma
yeah.
response,
Hmm.
right? When your trust scores are low, um you start being real hypervigilant for people who may not actually be working against you.
Right.
They may just be using language that you're not familiar with and not comfortable with. And so learning to, yeah, to exist and to confront conflict and to hold each other accountable too, to call each other out and to note problems in communities before they take the presidential office. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. Can I name one more source of hope though,
Sure.
that I had, that I do want to just
Is it Marshmallow
to
Peeps? Because that's mine.
no, no. Wait, is that your source of hope?
Well, it is at Easter. I love Marshmallow Peeps.
Okay, see, okay, so to model engaging conflict well, horrible. I
Yeah.
don't like them at all. No, I think they're I like marshmallows, and then they add all the sugar on top, and I'm like, you just messed up a perfectly good marshmallow. What are we
Yeah, I'm
doing?
not supposed to eat them. They're
Um,
terrible. Yeah.
yeah, that's not my source of hope. No, my source of hope is actually like weird artists right
Hmm.
now, weird indie artists, and I'm particularly, a big one actually has been drag kings, who are often like in little local venues doing the weirdest acts you've seen in your life. Um, and I I'm naming them for two reasons. Number one is just a bare bones, like, I think they're delightful, and it's a nice. That's the coping level. Is like that. That's my break. But also, so there's a big intersection in the drag world and like the transgender world,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
in the it's a counterculture where they're really very, very fearlessly interrogating a lot of the assumptions we make about uh about both gender, but also like bodies, about sexuality, about respectability, um in ways that I think really matter right now, to be reminded that these are all, oh, hey, A, we kind of made these things up, and B, if I'm feeling shocked and scandalized by something, like, where did that impulse come from? Who benefits from it? And what freedom might there be found in pushing back against
Mm.
that? And so, and they're also, I think too, drag artists are really doing some of that presenting vulnerability work of getting on a stage and being visible,
Yeah.
and visible in a way that is outside of the charmed circle, right, of nice cis het citizens. Um,
Yeah, drag
and I,
queens and
yeah,
transgender folks are some of the bravest people I've ever met.
yes, yes, and I appreciate that both as just someone who really just delights in art and funky arts and new ideas, but also like I think those performers make me braver as a preacher, frankly, because oh my god, they're doing something. If they're willing to go out and very literally kind of put their bodies on the line to say something meaningful, then I can absolutely get in a pulpit and, use my voice and my kind of and my protection, right, as an ordained
Sure,
person and
right.
as yeah, as a nice looking cis lady. Like, yeah, we
Well, and I mean, we're
weird
in a
weird
system,
art.
right, where the Presbyterian system is, it's pretty hard to fire us. I mean, so like
Hmm.
we
It's
do
hard.
have some, we can, they'll make your life, unpleasant, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there are other ways to do it, I guess. But I mean, from an official thing, right? You can't officially just be fired if you decide to take a stand on something, right? I mean,
Hmm.
that's not going to happen. But yeah, I mean, I've been seeking out courageous people, like just people to, and I was thinking, I have a 98-year-old congregant, I think, who spent the entire election cycle writing postcards to people in Georgia.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking like, okay, she has like 500 things, I'm sure, on her bucket list that she wants to do at 98. This is probably not one of them, right? But she decided that this is the thing she can do, right? And she did it diligently. And I mean, to me, that's less than courage. That's persistence, right? That is somebody who
Hmm.
is willing to say, no, I'm going to do this. This is more important right now than what I need, right? This is more
Hmm.
important than me. And I think to see somebody at that age, right, to want to take a stand in some
Hmm.
way makes me think, well, what the hell is my excuse? I mean, like,
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I can do, and what I can do is preach and teach, and do the things that I do. These are my skills. And so, the hope I'm finding, I think, is that in saying that, is that I'm noticing now a lot more people in the church asking, what can we do? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people are getting frustrated with that question because it's a hard one to answer. And my first answer is always, first, you need to sit down and breathe. Right. Um,
Uh-huh.
but, um, but my second is, do the thing you can do. Right.
Hmm.
All of us, I know lawyers, I know teachers, I know all these people. And so to see them suddenly start to think of themselves as change agents just with the tools they have, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to conquer the world. You don't have to create world peace tomorrow. You just have to do what you can do.
Hmm.
And so, I think there is a peace in accepting your part, right? And just saying, this is what I care about. This is what I can do. Um, you know, I would love to be involved in every single thing that people want me to be involved in, right? But I would literally drop dead because I'd never sleep again.
Right. Right.
So,
Right. Right. Yeah.
I mean, you have to do this, right? I think we might be in an age of positive compartmentalization.
Well, you've said something about PPF before that I resonated with, which is like part of what you appreciate about the structure is you don't have to be always at 100 about everything because
Right.
there's a
Yeah.
number of teams and another yeah and
And you can still
now
figure stuff out. I mean, there's still stuff that needs figured out, right?
yeah yeah um I'm with you. I feel like that maybe that like that's the coping more than the hoping.
It
But
is.
no, but I
Yeah.
hear that though because
Yeah.
you have to be real about
Right.
your
Yeah.
yeah. I'll share too. Like this is a real true theological stance for me too. I think part of what is so sinister about these kind of attacks is it's not it's first and foremost it's the actual real true physical harm that it does to people, but secondarily it's such a distraction um from the ways in which we are I'm dead set convinced we're supposed to be living our lives. I think when we talk about the language in Christian tradition is about a new heaven and new earth, this kind of
Mm,
this
right,
hope for a day in which things are just right. My vision of a new heaven and a new earth is just like actually being able to really truly spend all of my time and energy focused on like positive mutual local relationships, as opposed to having to siphon a whole bunch of my time and energy putting out like
right.
fires we've created for ourselves. um and yeah, so you can't do everything, both because there's literally too much for you to do, but also because I think there's a part of your call as a spiritual being on this earth is to be a spiritual being on this earth, to have
Right.
positive relationships. And don't, oh my gosh, I think part of the tragedy is how many people I think are feeling compelled to set that aside to do crisis work. And not because the crisis work is meaningless or not needed, but just because it's so big. And I don't know. I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, I mean, I jokingly mentioned compartmentalization, right? But I mean, the idea is we're supposed to live, right, in a state of harmony, of
Mm-hmm.
balance, right? I mean, ideally, we are supposed to be in a world. There are no protests in the kingdom of God because they're unnecessary,
Because they're
right?
unnecessary. Yes,
Right? Like
exactly,
we are
exactly.
we are supposed to be striving toward the unnecessariness
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
all of this stuff, right? Of course, the problem is every time we think we've done it, right? If somebody comes along,
LOL. Yeah.
right? Or hold my beer, I'll take care of it. But so yeah, I mean, I think like there is something true about just the idea that we need to take seriously that we have spiritual identities, right?
Mm-hmm.
As you just said. And so whatever you want to call that, I don't care, right? I don't care where you get it from. I don't care what you look to. I don't care what you read. I don't care about any of that stuff. I care about the fact that you understand that if you can't nurture the inside of yourself, right, you will destroy
Mm-hmm.
the outside of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so what we're going to see is massive burnout because what's happened here, and I think the most nefarious thing to be a Presbyterian Peace Fellowship person is that this is an assault on peace, right? Just basic
Mm-hmm.
peace, right? Just the basic peace of living your life,
Yeah.
um,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And so that doesn't happen anymore. And so when you have lost that basic piece, right? Um, I don't know. It just seems like Lord of the Flies after that. I'm not sure what happens, right?
Yeah.
Because that piece is fundamental. And to your point, I think we're supposed to be walking around connecting to each other and be
Mm-hmm.
living in community and finding ways to harmonize and to be, in relationship with people who don't make sense to us, right? And all that stuff. And so I don't know. I still think it's possible. I know, like, I think God is God and bigger than all of this crap.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm still holding out hope. Peace can be realized.
Amen and amen. Yes. And that's, yes. So that's the hope and despair cocktail.
Right. Hmm.
For real.
Yeah, and go ahead and
But
feel all that stuff, right? Be confused, be angry, be sad, be whatever. Like just,
yeah. Well,
experience this.
yeah. I mean, I think that, yeah, no, that anger and that sadness, like, it's almost a cliche at this point, but like, I'm sure you've seen the kind of little sound bites of like, no, like if you're feeling angry and sad right now, that's a sign that like you're still in touch with your
Right.
humanity. And I
Yeah.
think there's something to that.
Well, it's my
Yeah.
hospice story.
Mm,
I was a hospice chaplain. I'm still a hospice chaplain to some degree, but I had a nurse come up to me and say, a beloved patient died, and she said, I can't do this anymore. And I said, well, when you
mm-hmm,
can do it, you need to quit.
mm-hmm,
Because if you can't feel this stuff, you can't help these people, right? I mean, that you have to. Empathy is key,
yeah.
right? To a lot of stuff, and it's key. It turns out to civilization.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, I guess the hope for myself and the blessing for folks listening is to be able to channel that that anger as a motivation and as an encouragement that, you're still bought in. You're still as
Right.
opposed to
Hmm.
a despair piece. But yeah, should we tell folks if they would like to get in touch with a community at PPF how to do so?
Yes, PPF, the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. And I'm sure
Yes.
Annica has all these wonderful places for you to find
I
us.
have a few. There are more wonderful places than I have prepared to talk about. Apologies for that. It has been a season, friends, living through flooding and some personal crises for both hosts. So apologies for not having everything in front of me. But if you would like to know what PPF is up to and where you might be able to connect with other peacemakers, go to presbypeacefellowship.org. presbypeacefellowship.org. You will find our working groups around gun violence prevention, peace churches, Presbyterians for Abolition, and our Palestine Solidarity Working Group. And if you would like a community to worship with, a really solid group of fellow seekers, we have some cradle Presbyterians, but we also have some people just trying to find ways to plug into a spiritual life with other exhausted, worried, scared, hopeful citizens. The Lost and Found virtual church meets every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can go to our website and find a registration link and show up anytime. And if you consider yourself a peacemaker and would like to share your story on this podcast, email us at info@presbypeacefellowship.org.
And in the meantime, take care of yourselves. Be at peace.
Take care of yourselves. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your people. Rally when you've got energy. Rest when you can get it. And go in peace.
Peace.